What up everyone, Shark here. Welcome back to the channel. What I've got for you guys today is a fully detailed guide to reconnaissance and broken arrow. We're going to start in the armory, looking at different stats. We'll talk about how spotting works in the game. We'll go through the 4 different types of reconnaissance units and give you some choices and options on the US and the Russian side. Then we're going to talk about counter reconnaissance, get into some tips and tricks, really diving into how laser designation can support your gameplay. And then we'll close out with a case study where an enemy really does a good job using reconnaissance against me on the back lines and how I deal with it. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Before we get into specific units and recommendations, I want to go over recce unit stats in the armory. So like every unit, infantry or tank, they'll have an armor value, they'll have a health value, they have a squad size value. Typically, the smaller the squad, the higher the stealth rating, but not always, as you'll see. The most important thing here is the optics rating and the different ranges for the optics. So typically, ground range refers to how far away they'll see enemy infantry units, ground units like tanks and other vehicles. Obviously, this is subject to stealth and cover multipliers. Then you have your low altitude range. This is low flying drones and helicopters. And then your high altitude range, these are your jets, bombers, and high altitude drones. Note that for an aircraft, like a fighter jet flying at low altitude, it's still spotted via the high altitude range. Right. So now as we get into the stealth value here, basically the way this works is like an inverse multiplier. So if you have the snipers, VDV sniper, with a range of 2000 optics, and then you have these Cav scouts, they have a stealth rating of 2.5. So assuming there's clear line of sight, there's no cover in play, these scouts will be visible at 2000 divided by 2.5, or 800 meters to the VDV snipers. Note that the Cav scouts, because they have less optics and the snipers have higher stealth, the Cav scouts will not be able to see the snipers at that range. Now, if you put the scouts in cover, whether that's forest or a building, that multiplies your stealth bonus by 2, so that'd be a 5. That would cut the detection range, even for the VDV snipers, down to 400 meters. So I'll have an example to kind of show how that works, but that's the basic math behind it. Other things you want to look at, movement speed is 18. This is pretty much the same for all infantry units. The weight really only comes into play when you're trying to figure out how you get these units on the field, whether it's a helicopter or truck, etc. This icon shows that they have a sprint. This icon shows that they can be para-dropped. The Cav Scouts have a smoke grenade with them that can be useful for breaking contact, getting out of trouble. The VDV snipers, on the other hand, have laser designation ability. One other thing you want to pay attention to is the weapon loadout. It's not super clear all the time. Sometimes it'll say suppressed build. Sometimes you can physically see the suppressor here. Notice it doesn't actually tell you that this weapon is suppressed. You have to kind of know based on the fact that it's suppressed loadout, or that you can physically see the suppressor. But all that does is that essentially reduces the range that you can be detected based on shooting. So based on testing, once you start firing with an unsuppressed weapon, it adds about 25 to 50% to your detection range and allows you to basically remain detected. The suppressor seems to minimize that. So you can fire suppressed without the enemy identifying you, as long as you're still outside that detection range. Something to keep in mind. The other thing that you want to pay attention to when you get into these weapon loadouts, sniper rifles can ignore sometimes 100% of cover, and usually for like marksman rifles 50% of cover. So something to keep in mind. And then also just taking a look at what these weapons can shoot at. Note that you can engage helicopters with sniper rifles, which will come into play later. What I have here is a quick demonstration of spotting ranges without line of sight considerations. So these rangers are going to move forward. There are 3 coordinate teams in the open, in this building, and in this forest. Now, a coordinate team stealth rating is 1.75. Rangers optics are 2000. So that means a spotting range of 1140 meters in the open for a coordinate team. Right there, yep, you see just under 1140 meters spotting that team in the open. For the other 2 teams, because they are in cover, one in the forest and one in this building, you'd expect the spotting range to be about 570 meters. Let's see who the Rangers spot next. Right there, yep, about 550 meters there spotted. And then as the Rangers continue to creep forward, again, 560, 570 meters. So that's cool. All three spotted. You can see buildings provide the same concealment bonus as the forest. Now, as the Rangers back away, they can maintain vision even though now they're outside of that range. So once you've spotted a unit, it loses that stealth bonus. And so here you're going to see the Rangers will eventually lose sight of this team, again, about 1,140 meters, where they would have spotted the team out in the open. So that team disappears. This team, again, will disappear right around the same range, 1150. Now the team in the open remains in view well past the 1150. Basically, you can't go until you break line of sight. So once you break line of sight, and you no longer see that team, they'll become concealed. Now, as I move back, the Rangers now have to get back in within that 1150 range to spot that team again. And now looking at vehicles and drones, which are other important Relicaa units, you see vehicles have their full spectrum of armor values. Some vehicles here are amphibious. This is your forward and reverse move speed, which is really relevant, your ability to back up. Note that because their vehicles, the stealth rating is significantly lower, but the optic range doesn't really get past 2,000 for ground vehicles. So we'll talk about when you would use ground vehicles for Relicaa, but it's not the same as when you would use, say, a sniper team. The other thing I want to highlight for this drone, right, it shows you kind of the optics range, the forward speed, the turn radius, the fuel. This is essentially your endurance. Optic range is kind of wonky. So a 4-post is a low altitude drone. It's got a ground range of 2,000, a low altitude range of 2,500. That's mainly against other drones and helicopters. A high altitude range of 2,000. So it's not as good for spotting planes. What I want to point out, though, is that it doesn't tell you anywhere that this is a low altitude drone versus a high altitude drone like the Orion. It's not indicated in the Armory. So instead, what I'm going to do is give you a list of which drones are low altitude and which drones are high altitude. So you can just be armed with that going forward. The first unit type that I want to discuss, these are your, what I call pure snipers, right? And I basically define them as they have a stealth rating of 3 and an optics rating of 2,000. There are a handful of these units on both the US and the Russian side. I think all but like the heaviest specializations have access to these units. And the sole purpose of these guys is to be your backline infiltrators, to laser designate enemy artillery or anti-air units, to spot enemy pushes before they happen, to just generally be a nuisance. As you'll see in some of the demos, they are extremely hard to spot and counter-recon, especially if you micro them correctly, but they are really not combat units and shouldn't be used as such. One thing that's been pointed out in a couple of videos, and I do want to shout out Operative Lex because he makes this point really, really well, is you shouldn't be trying to reconnoiter the entire map as a single player. I'd say focus on if you have a specific lane or a side of the map, or if you can get deep on one side. But Relicaa units do require quite a lot of babysitting and a lot of micro to use effectively. So you don't want to overtax yourself. You want to have a couple of these out in a position that supports your tactical objectives. And that allows you to go on and continue to fight without worrying about the Relicaa game as much. These are units that you want to kind of plant early in the game, move around, try to keep alive for the entire game, and use them to pester your enemy and allow you to kind of predict where your enemy is going to go and attack. They're not really designed for combat. On the Russian side, everybody but the guard's armored specialization has access to a pure sniper build. So you've got your VDV snipers here from the VDV brigade. Note, you can get them with a long-range rifle loadout. I recommend you just stick with suppressed. Remember, these guys are not intended to be a combat unit. They're a spotting and laser designation unit. You don't get any additional optical range with the long-range rifle loadout, so I would stick with suppressed. Gives them a better chance of breaking contact if they are spotted and do take contact. From motorized infantry, you've got the Diversanti, as long as you keep them with the Informers loadout, which we'll talk about a little bit later. The coastal troops get the PDSS. You can upgrade these guys with grenade launchers, but then all 4 of them carry grenade launchers, which is kind of wonky. Again, not a combat unit, but because there's no additional point cost and no change to optics and stealth, I'd say do what you like. And then from the mechanized infantry, you do get access to a sniper team. Note, it's only 2 people as opposed to 3 for some of the other sniper teams, so you do want to make sure you keep these guys out of contact. Again, you can upgrade to the anti-materiel rifle, but it doesn't give you any additional optical range. So I recommend staying with the SV98 to make them as cheap as possible. The options on the US side are going to look very, very similar. So you've got scout snipers here. Again, 3 stealth rating, 2000 vision. Upgrading to the anti-material rifle does not give them any sort of additional optical range. So not worth upgrading. The Armored Brigade gets Cav Scouts, but they don't fit this category. We'll talk about them later. The Airborne Snipers from the Airborne Infantry, a 3-man team, but again, 3 stealth, 2000 range. You can equip them with suppressed rifles. The Scouts from the Striker Cav Regiment do not apply. And then SOF has a bunch of different recce choices, but the pure sniper are the Ranger Snipers here. 3-man team, 2000 optical range, 3 stealth rating, and suppressed rifle loadout for them. The next units I want to talk about are what I call your utility reconnaissance or your multi-role reconnaissance. And a lot of times these actually end up looking more like elite infantry than true reconnaissance units, but they usually have a higher stealth value and better optics. So the Spetsnaz GRU here, this is a good example. 1750 optical range, 2.5 stealth, but 8 personnel. And in this loadout, they can carry RPG-28s and Verbas. Right, they also have outstanding CQB damages, 3 and 4 for their AK-15, the GP-34. The only thing that they can't do is laser designate. And so how you use these units depends on what your infantry availability looks like and what role that you need them to fill. In a lot of cases, I like to use these multi-role recce units in more urban environments or urban maps. So if the lane that I'm playing in is in the middle of a city, pure snipers are potentially less value to me unless I'm really looking to laser designate. And so something like this, where these guys can get forward, provide good optics, but are pretty durable. 10 armor, 8 members of the squad, good optical range, good stealth, but then RPG-28s and Verbas, the ability to clear buildings with their high damage and high model count. Like, that's kind of what I'm looking at. So they're a kind of do everything unit, more of like an elite infantry than a recce. But how you build out these guys can actually be really helpful. It just depends on the environment. Before I go through some of my favorite units on the Russian side, it's worth keeping in mind a couple of things when you're looking at the weapon loadout. Sometimes it'll be very clear about a CQB or a standoff loadout. In this case, all it says is, hey, we're swapping out your thermobaric launcher for an RPG-16. What's not obvious, though, is that now these short-range rifles are unsuppressed. They have better range, but reduced damage value here. And so it's worth keeping in mind how you want to use these units. In this case, if I want to use them for urban recce, I don't need that extra range. I might want the RPG-16 to make them a little bit more durable against vehicles. But in this case, I think for the most part, I actually just want them to have suppressed weapons. This thermobaric launcher is fine for light vehicles and infantry, not going to do anything against tanks. But that allows me to move these guys around, potentially beat other recce squads or mainline infantry squads in urban combat. And use them again with their spotting range and their stealth to spot for me in a tighter, more contested environment. All right, from among the Russian kind of utility recce units, a couple of my favorites, the Spetsnaz GRU, the Batman squad. These are basically just elite infantry. They're fantastic. You can have them with the mixed Verba and RPG-28 loadout, or you can have them specialized into anti-tank or anti-aircraft. But 10 armor, 8 models, great optics, great stealth. The only thing that they really don't have is the ability to laser designate. So these, think of these more as CQB or forest clearing infantry and less a true recce unit, but their sight and their stealth makes them really valuable across the board. Similarly, you've got the VDV Spetsnaz here with the Burr thermobaric launcher. I think I prefer this loadout because of the range and the damage on the small arms. Now, the Spetsnaz VMF are very similar, but you'll notice they do a little bit less CQB damage. They only have 6 models, but they trade in the ability to laser designate. So for the coastal troops, this can be really valuable as well. Your Morskaya Razvedka are decent. Same thing with your VDV Razvedka, right? Decent all-round unit, relatively small. But the last one that I really want to highlight, and I brought this up in a previous video, the Diversanti with the ambushers loadout. So they lose the ability to laser designate, but the RPG-30 is one of the best handheld anti-tank weapons in the game. Short range, but it defeats and basically ignores active protection. And that's really, really valuable if you get these guys in close to ambush enemy tanks. So I just want to highlight this again. because there's a lot of value to be had here. Now, the US side, especially the Special Operations Forces, have a lot of different kind of utility recce units. So I want to highlight a couple of things here. One, the Cavalry Scouts from the Armored Brigade, not as great as a pure recce unit, but they come with 3 javelins, which can be really, really nice if you use them appropriately. Use them to spot and then assist some of your team weapon teams in harassing enemy vehicles, especially enemy vehicles without APS. This is basically an instant kill there. On the USMC side, the Force Recon, you can use these guys either way. I think that I generally prefer this Black Ops loadout if you're going to be in tight forests or in cities. Green Ops gives you a little bit better with these handheld anti-tank launchers, but they're kind of like this disposable anti-tank, single use. And other than that, you actually take a hit in your damage elsewhere on your rifles. So either way, these guys are a good kind of multi-role CQB/recon unit. They'll hold up in an infantry fight, but they've got good optics, good stealth. The main downside is they don't have the ability to laser designate. And then on the soft side, Special Operations Forces, you get a bunch of these units. Now, they are very expensive, but there's a lot of value here. The Green Beret snipers with the sniper rifle loadout are essentially another pure sniper reconnaissance unit with an extra person, right? So you've got 3 stealth, you've got 2000 optics, you've got the ability to laser designate. If you swap them over to the Punisher, the Flash loadout, they lose that ability to laser designate and they lose some of their optical range, but they maintain their stealth. So these guys are some of my favorite units for clearing out forests or clearing out buildings. This Flash is an incendiary device that is really, really nasty and can basically clear anything out of a building from range without having to get in and breach it. On the STT side, I almost never use the pararescue loadout. They are a decent CQB setup with the flashbang, but only 6 models. I think I prefer a special tactics team because now in this loadout, they have the ability to laser designate and they come with a stinger, which is really valuable. Plus all of their weapons are suppressed. Great urban recce unit that you can use to also provide some support in anti-air. And then I personally also really like the RRC Rangers. I like to put them in the standoff loadout for the Maws. Again, they have the ability to kind of tangle at range, but get in tight with all the different weaponry here. And with the Maws, it can hold on against tank pushes or light vehicles. If you go CQB, they'll do much better damage in close, but they swap out the Maws for the AT4. Either way, it's just a little bit of a hardier unit with still decent optic range. Think of these like some of the other Russian elites. They can hang in there and win a couple of fights. So good for urban close quarters reconnaissance where they might get approached by vehicles. Now I want to talk about vehicle reconnaissance units. And the primary role of vehicle reconnaissance units is to extend the sight range of your other armored units in vehicles. So for example, most tanks have a sight and optics range equivalent to the range of their main gun, sometimes a little bit shorter. Especially if you got a vehicle with a missile launcher on it, the missiles can almost always fly further than that vehicle can see. So having a spotting vehicle, a recon vehicle with those units is extremely valuable in making sure they can maximize the use of their weapon systems. This is doubly important for main gun rounds because main gun rounds ignore active protection, whereas both sides have missiles, but the missiles can only get knocked down. So if you want to be able to do damage at range to the enemy, you have to be able to spot them first, and these vehicles will help you do that. In some cases, you've got actual tanks, like the T-90M Rozvedchik, upgraded with the Optronic system, has 2000 vision range. Obviously, really, really good frontal armor and main gun. It's a good fighting unit. The downside, and similar, the SEP2 on the US side does also not have active protection. So you do need to keep these guys a little bit back and make sure they're not targeted by missiles. Your tanks with active protection can be up front. Some of the other vehicles, they're lighter. Again, you're not going to see a stealth rating really below 1.25 on these vehicles, but they normally combine some sort of extra utility. So decent optics, sometimes, and you would hope, the ability to laser designate. And then you can normally upgrade sensors. So in this case, now this is a 2400 vision range for the VDV Brigade. Amphibious, airdroppable, ability to laser designate. This is going to be really valuable in supporting any armored pushes that you have. Similar for the BRM here, you can upgrade it with AGMs, but then it loses its ability to laser designate. So just keep in mind what you need. Sometimes having a vehicle with the ability to laser designate is valuable, but most of your laser designation is probably being done by snipers in the rear elements. Really what you're looking for is maximizing this optic value so that it can spot for your other tanks and vehicles. All right, to demonstrate the value of vehicle spotting units, what I'm going to do, I have these two Russian vehicles with missile launchers here. The missile launcher range exceeds their optics range. So I've got this T-90M Nikitka, which is basically a recce tank. As it moves to the edge of the forest, you'll notice it's going to, with its superior optics, it's actually going to spot the enemy tank. Right now it's concealed by line of sight being in the forest. Once it spots the enemy tank, the BMP and the Barbarous can now launch their missiles on the tank, despite not being able to identify this vehicle, which hasn't moved until the T-90 showed up. On the Russian side, we obviously talked about the T-90M Razvedchik. This is your best fighting reconnaissance unit, can support your larger armored pushes. And then every specialization has a vehicle with 2400 range if you update the optics. On the VDV Brigade, that is your rheostat. From the Guard Tank Brigade, that's your PRP 5G. Again, you got to upgrade the turret with the PRP 5. For the motorized infantry, again, PRP 5. For the coastal troops, it's your Machina with the MRU optic system. And for the mechanized infantry, it is your Argus with the PRP 4A turret. On the US side, you have the M1A2 SEP V2 Tua, which is very similar to the Razvedchik, 2000 range, main battle tank. Good all-around performer, but again, no APS, just smoke. From the Armored Brigade, you also get access to these Bradley fighting vehicles. Because they're in the Recon tab and not the Vehicle tab, it's a good opportunity to get some additional armor on the field if you need it, but their range is limited to 2000. The Bradley B-Fist with the modernization upgrade and the M981 Fist V, those both have a vision range of 2400, so those are your excellent spotting units. The USMC specialization does not have a vehicle with higher than 1750 spotting. Airborne infantry, it's going to be the Humvee LRAS 3 that can spot at 2400 meters for you. From the Stryker Cavalry Regiment, you actually have two. You've got the Stryker RV. In this case, I've outfitted it with the Bushmaster and a Javelin, but it maintains its ability to designate and 2400 vision. And then the Armored Knight upgrade also improves vision to 2400 meters. And then on the soft side, actually, none of their vehicles have that super extended range. Most of their vehicles really serve as troop transports. All right, and lastly, we are going to talk about drones. So drones can be really useful. They have their purpose. They're typically much more responsive than the other ground units. They can even be equipped in some cases with weaponry. They can almost always laser designate. So there's value to drones. But some of the more expensive drones you need to be careful with, like the Sentinel. Yeah, it sounds great, 4500 sight range, 1.5 stealth, but no countermeasures and only 15 hit points. So a single S300 shot will hit it and it will not miss. As we kind of get into this, the best way to use drones, there are basically two approaches. There's the high altitude drones where you're spotting and then maintaining sight of spotted units. This is stuff like the Sentinel, the Global Hawk, the Reaper, the Orion for the Russians. The purpose of these is to sit behind the front line and just help your units keep track of what the enemy is doing, potentially laser designate for some targets. You do have to be really careful of the air environment though, because they are very, very vulnerable. On the low altitude side, as I'll show you here in a minute, these are really good for counter reconnaissance and spotting because they fly lower. They are much closer to the ground. The thing you got to keep in mind is that high altitude aircraft and drones fly at about 800 meters, whereas low altitude it's about 150 meters. And that makes a significant difference when it comes to spotting. But your low altitude drones, your 4-post, your Corsair on the Russian side, and your RQ-7 Shadow on the US side, because they're lower, they stand a much better chance of spotting some very kind of sneaky units like snipers in the woods, whereas the higher altitude drones most likely will not, with one exception. And then with a lot of these drones, you can arm them. Usually you'll see either Hellfires or Stingers. Stingers can be useful in dealing with other drones and helicopters, especially if you want to do the drone swarm tactic, which is something that I've seen, especially in prep for a nuke. The bombs I haven't seen be as useful. Again, usually you want it to be a balance of low cost and capability. So in this case, like I actually like the Hellfires on the Reaper because if you catch an enemy vehicle out on the flank, the Hellfires can very accurately target it. It's a top attack weapon, so it does a lot of damage and will almost always penetrate. On the Russian side, you can just stack these drones up because they're so cheap with ATGMs and flood a zone. And if the enemy doesn't have good anti-air or a lot of it in some cases, you can actually be quite a menace with these drone swarms. So something to keep in mind. Now, as we get into counter reconnaissance, the first thing I want to highlight is that doing this in this game is actually really hard. With the stealth mechanics and a lot of the kind of the map design between line of sight, forests, and buildings, it can be really hard to spot and then clear enemy recon units. So the best way to do counter reconnaissance is really to prevent the infiltration in the first place. Most commonly, what you'll see is like a lone vehicle or helicopter flying along the edge of the map early in the game or flying off totally away from any other objective points. This is usually a good indicator that a sniper team is being inserted somewhere. So keep an eye out for that. It's usually not a bad idea if you're going to put a drone out during the air attacks to send it out to the flank and keep it in the back just to make sure that your enemy can't immediately put a sniper unit on your back lines. But unfortunately, the primary like indicator that there's an infiltrator on your back lines is that one of your supply points or one of your anti-air vehicles or an artillery piece will just blow up with absolutely no warning. Sometimes it's counter battery, sometimes it's laser guided. And so being able to tell the difference, and actually if you can watch shells come in and they do that little course correction on the end, that's a great indicator of laser designation, which means you've got an infiltrator problem. So I've got a couple of examples I'm going to queue up here, but the general approach I want to highlight is you want to use low flying drones if you have them available, if not helicopters or recon vehicles to help clear back lines, in particular when you've got an indicator that there is an enemy sniper team in the area. If you're trying to clear every piece of forest in the map, it's going to take you all game and you will not contribute. But if you think you've got a problem, get something with really good spotting. Again, a low altitude drone or a helicopter that can go through and systematically clear the forest and the woods in the back line. And then once you identify the infiltrator unit, come in and clear it with attack helicopters, vehicles, or high offense infantry. But remember, the best way to deal with counter reconnaissance is to prevent those recce units from getting in the first place. So I've got some snipers in the woods over here. I'm going to take a standard drone. This is a Reaper. It has 4,500 ground sight range, right? And it flies at 800 meters. Now, 4,500 divided by 6 is about 750. So even though I know there are snipers in these woods, the MQ-9 cannot see them because it flies above the detection range. So even if it pops right on top of them, it can't see them. Let me pull them back. Let's try the Global Hawk. This is the best recon unit in the game. From a range perspective, it has a range of 5,500 meters. 5,500 divided by 6 is 916. So you'll see as it passes over the forest, it's able to spot both of the snipers very briefly before they disappear from screen. So first thing for counter recon, a Global Hawk can find snipers in the woods, but other high altitude drones really cannot. Now, if you use a low altitude drone, because it flies so much closer, it doesn't need the crazy optical range of the Global Hawk. So this RQ-7 Shadow and its Russian equivalents will be able to find the snipers in the woods here just by virtue of them being much lower to the ground. But you see how close you have to fly to basically achieve vision. You have to basically comb the woods and directly overfly the recce. So this is really important when you're trying to find sniper man hiding from you in the woods. Now, helicopters can be a great way to conduct counter recon because they fly low, they've got good vision, but you do want to be careful. These are relatively light helicopters, and I've chosen them because they've got guns and decent vision. But you'll see, as soon as they come across the Rangers, they take a fair amount of damage. And so once you find the enemy unit, in that case, the snipers just killed that killer egg, the first shot, and then killed the Kiowa before they're spotted. So worth keeping in mind, whatever units you're going to use to try to clear the snipers out of the wood line, make sure they're durable enough to survive And if it's not a sniper team, if it's a team with like an anti-tank weapon and you try to use like a Bradley CFV to clear it, that's also dangerous. So do your counter recon in packs, use the low altitude drones to try to identify the enemy location first, so you're not going on a wild goose chase, and then bring enough force to make sure you clean it up. You don't want to give the enemy a nice convenient trade. Now, when we talk counter recon, the first thing you need to highlight is the fact that when it comes to sniper combat, it really comes down to what units shoot first. So in this case, I'm going to have these snipers cross the open. There's an enemy identical sniper squad in the wood line here. And you'll see as they move, they're going to get spotted first. They're going to get shot first. And those initial shots, now you send into shock and panic. And even though they're identical and they can shoot and do damage back, the shock and the panic effects are going to be enough to completely tilt that engagement. So when you're doing counter recon, you have to spot the enemy unit first and come at it with overwhelming firepower. Otherwise, you're going to lose the engagement. All right, so what I've got here is a good example of the opponent using reconnaissance to great effect and me struggling with the counter recce. So you see early on, I have some indications that he has spotted my units just because artillery comes in and is striking my vehicles before his attack helicopter shows up. Next, a few minutes later, I'm setting up for a big armored flank here, and you can tell from the reaction, despite me having an Orion overhead to try to spot, I don't see his snipers. And he actually brings in an airplane to great effect to totally blunt my push because I'm unable to spot his recce units. And then a little bit later, I recognize that he still has an infiltrator on my back line. I bring in an attack helicopter, and this is what finally enables me to find the sniper and kill the sniper unit so I can go about using the flank of the map the way I want to. The first and most basic tip I want to cover is the use of shift queuing commands to move your recce units through cover. So these snipers, I'm going to move them through this wood line by shift queuing move commands. And what's valuable with this, I'll speed it up a little bit, is now I don't have to micro these units the entire time. I can go fight elsewhere and then come back and they'll continue to move and stay in cover. You can even use this to include moving through buildings. The one thing that you really can't do with the move queue is sprint. So instead, what I'm going to do is wait. These guys are on their move queue. They're going to move into this building. They're going to hop to this building. Then when they cross the road, I hit sprint and it'll activate immediately. They'll go ahead and sprint across the street and then they'll just continue to move through this cover until they get where they need to go. Now, for basic stealthy recon insertions, the easiest way to do this is to set your helicopter to low altitude and look for clear path lines, give it move orders, and then shift queue up a path. Right, and now you'll watch the helicopter, it'll still be able to move at a decent speed, right? When you go to low altitude, the helicopters really just slow down when they have to clear obstacles. So if you queue up this path, it'll continue to fly at a reasonable speed as it moves along the route. And because it's staying low, you have less of a chance of it getting seen and intercepted. This can be really valuable early in the game when you're trying to get recon units out onto the flanks very, very quickly. And the last little tip here for inserting your recce units, now you can obviously have a helicopter and you can keep it low altitude and like shift queue up a path along the roads here. And that can be really, really valuable in helping get around, use line of sight blockers. I could have the helicopter trace this entire route. Or if you're the US Special Operations specialization, you can get in here with this Silent Hawk and be really aggressive about your recon placement just during the air attacks, right? Because this helicopter is really, really hard for the enemy to spot because it's got a 2.5 stealth rating. So it allows you to be a little bit more aggressive, and by staying at high altitude, move significantly faster than other enemy helicopters, aircraft, and vehicles. It is worth keeping other air units around to protect it. Like I've got my F-22 here for anti-air. I've got this F-35 for seed. But now I can get my Silent Hawk in all the way up here and then tell it to unload and then back out. And the odds of it actually getting in and being able to insert these snipers on the back line without being spotted is really, really valuable. Even if it does get spotted, here's the downside. let's say I get the snipers in, the helicopter's backing away and get spotted. If you're a smart player, that's a good indicator that like, hey, he's dropped something here in my backline, and now I got to go do a counter-recon scrub. But this unit in particular is just much harder to counter for this type of early game infill than some of the other units that are available to you. And then again here, just demonstrating the ability to kind of spot and hold units, right? Again, my Reaper can't see these snipers. I'm going to have it orbit that point, but as I bring in the shadow and I tell it to order the point where I know the snipers are, it will spot those snipers, and then the Reaper overhead will help maintain vision of those snipers even after the shadow kind of wraps around. So now we can see these for an extended period of time. It gives you time to bring in artillery, bring in other vehicles, something to deal with these enemy units. Now at this point, there have been enough guides out there. All of you understand laser designation, right? So I select the Ranger Sniper team, I hit N, they designate this T90. I have my Paladin. I'm going to hit T, but not just once. I'm going to hit it 3 times to switch to the guided ammunition. And I'm going to call for this bombardment. Let's speed it up here. And you'll see these are HE warheads. So it's going to take 4 to 5 hits to destroy this T90. So because you're getting good skin-on-skin contact with those rounds, they still do a fair amount of damage. Now, for the next target, I have a Tornado S, which is a Smirch update upgraded with guided rockets. So in this case, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to have it attack this T90. Again, these are HE warheads and not cluster, and there's a reason that I'm showing you guys this. So we have it sped up. The rockets are going to come in, and you'll see it's panicking the tank, but not really doing a whole lot of damage, which is what you'd expect because these are HE rockets. You can see from the ground splat, though, that the AoE on these rockets is much larger than the guided shell. So if I select these snipers and I actually just move the laser des to behind the tank and I have the tornado fire again, now the rockets are going to guide on that laser, not necessarily on the vehicle. And I think we can kill this vehicle a little bit quicker if we can get some rear armor hits. Just like that, 2 rockets. So pretty useful little trick. Obviously, with the laser designation behind onto the ground, it's not going to follow the vehicle if it moves. But if you've got your recce in a good spot, you can snipe vehicles very, very quickly, even if you don't have the ideal munition for the engagement. And then as another fun laser designation trick, I know this is something that I've seen before, but you can have your units laser designate a helicopter and then use artillery to target that helicopter. Yeah, so first shot missed, but the next 2 definitely did not. Super handy in dealing with those really, really tanky Russian helicopters. All right, the last thing I want to demonstrate with laser designation is how some units like the A10 with the Maverick can fire its weapons as long as they're laser designated without coming up to high altitude. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to have the A10 literally just fly through. And you see it's automatically launching its Mavericks on all these laser designated targets without having to actually pop up to high altitude, which is huge. Now, granted, the number of laser targets made it so it didn't kill all of them, but it did kill a helicopter and a tank without ever having to expose itself to anti-air threats. So pretty valuable there. All right, that is all that I've got. As always, let me know in the comments, what did I miss? What questions do you still have? I do want to throw some thanks out there. One to my team, SKENG, Mule, Relicaa, FeriG, and the crew. Thank you for helping me test, design the map editor, and providing feedback on some of the talking points. I also want to throw a shout out to Operative Lex. He has a couple really good videos that cover reconnaissance, and Atom.Fliege, who published a really nice guide on Steam that kind of shows how to test some of the spotting mechanics. But that is it, and we'll see y'all in the next one.